Hello everyone, I'm 8mm Mauser Man, and this is going to be a video where I do a bunch of talking. But I promise next week I will have a video where there is a lot more shooting than I've had in the last few videos. Now, if you know much about me, then you know that my day job is ministry. And I'm not a huge fan of the idea of like the 7 deadly sins and those kinds of things because that idea isn't really found in the Bible, and I do think it has some value as a cultural idea. So what I would like to talk about is the deadly sins in the gun community. And the first one I'd like to talk about is pride, because this is a huge problem that we all run into. But before we go any further, I want to mention I am using a different audio recording setup, so there may be some audio issues while I'm trying to figure this out. Overall, though, it should be better than I've had in the past. Now, something about pride that my mom always told me was that I don't need to prove to everyone else that I'm the smartest person in the room. I don't need to try and sound smart and act smart for people to like me. And I think that that's something that I've kind of grown up believing was a pretty good thing, is to not try to make everyone think that you are this amazing and awesome person. However, oftentimes in the gun community, I have found that people want everyone to think that they are the smartest person, not only in the room, but the smartest person on the internet. Every comment section, these people try to prove themselves by correcting the tiniest little mistake that somebody said. Maybe it was just they said something wrong, like maybe they said 7.62 instead of 7.63 when talking about a round or something like that. Maybe they referred to a 7.62 round as 308 in a video, and then somebody goes and says, actually, there's a difference. It's kind of that internet guy that you see saying, actually, and that is the idea that I'm talking about right now. These people will sometimes just be a jerk in real life too, trying to correct others in order to impress somebody that they think might be there. And in my opinion, it is not always worth it or wise to correct someone, even if you are right. There are times where you should correct, but sometimes these people are right, and sometimes they're just not. So first, let's talk about some ways that these people are right, and I'm going to be pointing to some things behind me. Right here, I have a whole bunch of 8mm Mauser rounds. Now, I have had several people in my comment section tell me, actually, it's not 8mm Mauser, it's 7.92 or 7.9 or 7.92 by 57mm JS or IS. Frankly, in the words of Lieutenant Dan, I know that. I just don't care. It is not the biggest issue in the world if I refer to this round as 8mm Mauser. In the United States, it's more commonly known as 8mm Mauser. Trust me, the channel is named 8mm Mauser Man. I know what the name of the round actually is. I just use that terminology because it's common and popular and rolls off the tongue easier than 7.92 by 57mm IS. It's easier to say, so that's what I say. Now, there are definitely avenues where you should use the term correctly. However, in many instances, it's really not that important. And going to that idea, I would like to talk about something else. You will also see my M16A1 behind me. There are some people who, if I said, this is my M16A1, they would say, well, is it full auto? If it's not full auto, it's not an M16. And yes, you're correct. But if I say, this is my AR-15 that looks like an M16, every single time that I start a video, it's going to get annoying really fast. So, shorthand, I say it's my M16. Another example, and in my opinion, Enfield guys are actually some of the worst people in this, clips versus chargers. The British documents call the Enfield clips chargers. Now, I have a Mosin Nagant stripper clip behind me. I don't have any Enfield stripper clips nearby, but the design is almost identical in a lot of ways, other than that the Enfield has some lightning cuts on it to make it a little bit lighter to carry, and differences like that. But generally speaking, they're actually almost identical. Many Enfield guys will correct people saying they're not called clips, they're called chargers. They make a really big deal out of this. It really doesn't matter. Although they're technically correct, it's not worth starting the fight over that many of them start the fight over it with. Here's another one, and this one actually does have some merit. Sometimes people will refer to a complete round as a bullet. I do this sometimes too. My ministry job is working with people from other countries, and sometimes I take them out shooting, and I want to practice proper safety rules and all of those kinds of things. Now, because I am teaching them how to be safe with a firearm, they're remembering some things because they might not have held a firearm before. So sometimes when I'm talking to them, I will refer to a full round as a bullet. I'll do that because they might know the word bullet, they might not know the word round. And if they're trying to remember all of the safety rules and those kinds of things, the less other information I can give them is probably better at the time. I can correct something later, like, okay, so just so you know, it's actually called a round. I can't correct, oh, you accidentally shot someone. So I focus on the most important things and save some of the other issues for later, because if I use the word bullet, they know what I'm talking about, and I know what I'm talking about, and there's clear communication across the board. Although there is an avenue where you should correct that, for example, if somebody goes into a gun store and says, I want to buy bullets, you should make sure that they know what they're actually buying. But generally speaking, I just don't think this is as big of an issue as some people make it in certain situations. Another one, and this one is controversial, is magazines and clips. I'm not saying that you should never bring up the difference, but I am saying that there may be certain times that bringing up the difference is just not important. So the M16A1 behind me has a 20-round magazine in it, and then right next to that there is a Mosin Nagant clip. The difference is a magazine has a spring that feeds rounds into the chamber. A clip is just for loading a magazine. Again, in most cases because end block clips work differently, but that's another conversation. Now, there are certain situations where bringing up the difference between a magazine and a clip is very important. I think one of those is when we are talking about legal definitions and law. If somebody says clip, you can bring that up as a way of saying, hey, I just want you to know, like, you don't necessarily know as much as me when it comes to this. So when we have this conversation, we should make sure we're using the correct terminology. However, I remember one time I was out with my grandpa, and we were shooting guns, and he used the word clip instead of magazine. My grandpa has been shooting guns longer than I've been alive. So because of that, he's probably been shooting them since he was around 13 years old, if not even younger than that. So I'm not going to correct him. Not because I'm not right. I'm not technically right. It's because it's just not productive in that conversation. So what's the point? Now let's talk about examples where people are pretty clearly wrong. Now, the first one is sometimes people just have this air of pride when they're talking about which XYZ is better. And in all honesty, you just can't make that decision because you can almost always think of a circumstance where one other thing will be better. A clear example is a lot of people talk about whether the Enfield, the Mauser, or the Mosin is the better rifle. And although I personally would say I think the Mauser is probably the best, there is just this pride of like, if you don't agree with me on this, you are just an idiot. And that is just stupid. One, these rifles have been pretty much obsolete for the last 50 years of firearms design. So talking about which one is the best is a matter of history, is a matter of interest, and we can have that conversation. It can be really fascinating. But talking about it with the force to insult others and treat them like a moron just because they disagree, I think is kind of ridiculous. And in certain situations, each one might have some advantages over the others. A second example is I'm a pretty big fan of Paul Harrell. Paul Harrell often brings out his rifle and he says, this is my A1 pattern rifle. He has A2 handguards in his, and many people will correct him saying, no, actually that's an A2. Okay, don't you think Paul Harrell, who has been in the military for countless years and been teaching and making YouTube videos and teaching professionally for such a long time, would know the difference between an A1 and an A2 rifle that he owns? He just changed out the handguards. This is just people who don't know that much trying to act like they know a lot. And it shows when you do that kind of thing, you actually start looking like an idiot. Another time that this comes up is when people correct the gear of others for no reason. So sometimes AR guys will say, well, there's no reason to know an AK. They're just trash rifles. They're, XYZ. They're inaccurate. They're all of these things. And in most circumstances, when somebody is correcting gear in that type of way, they don't really know what they're talking about. They just have brand loyalty. Some people might say, Glock is the only handgun worth carrying. There are people who say that kind of thing, and they're just wrong. Some people want to carry a CZ75 or a Beretta 92, and they have their own personal reasons for that. They have made the decision that that is better for them, and who are you to say that it's not better for them? Another time that this comes up is just people just repeat these myths over and over again. So an easy myth that you might find is Mosin Nagants don't jam or AKs don't jam, period. It's an absolute statement. It's not true. Every gun jams sometimes. So to make those absolute statements is just foolish and ridiculous. So really, anytime you hear an absolute statement, you should be weary of it. Sometimes absolute statements are true, but generally speaking, they're not, and it is a prideful situation. Finally, one really clear example that people bring up, I might say I built this M16. And someone will say, actually, you didn't build it, you assembled it. When you were a kid and you played Legos, would you say, hey, look at this Millennium Falcon I built? Or would you say, hey, look at this Millennium Falcon I assembled? You probably said built. Built is what happens when we take things and put something together. You don't assemble a house because you built it out of pieces of wood and you didn't actually go and cut the wood down from the tree yourself. You built the house. It's the wording that we use. Built is an overarching term, and it's just somebody trying to sound smart, and in the process they're just ostracizing themselves from others. I have no idea if this is going to be popular, and I'm sure there will be some people leaving angry comments down below. Now, if you liked this video, please leave a positive comment down below, and I will know that I was at least interesting to somebody today. But anyway, I angered a whole bunch of people on the internet, and I lived on.
Which proves it's hard to get the best of a man named John. John.